Good evening and welcome to blackdoctor.org. I am your host tonight, Shamika Rhymes. Let me know where you guys are watching from. Drop that in the chat and make sure that you share this with your network. And if you have any questions along the way, drop them in the chat and we'll try to get to those. So today we are honoring World Mental Health Day. Let us know where you're watching from. And this is an important day dedicated to raising global awareness around mental health. Now, mental health is a critical aspect of our overall well-being, yet it still remains one of the most stigmatized and misunderstood areas of healthcare, especially in the Black community. So tonight, we're going to be joined by an incredible lineup of mental health professionals who are here to guide us through some of the unique challenges faced by Black individuals when it comes to mental health. And they're also going to offer some resources and strategies for healing. So let me introduce you to our panel of experts. We have Dr. Sabrina Renteria, and she's a child and adolescent psychiatrist at Cedars-Sinai. Hi, Dr. Sabrina.
Hi.
We've got Kim Strong. She is a licensed clinical social worker at Cedars-Sinai. Hi, Kim. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. And we've got Waridi Parsons. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist at Cedars-Sinai. Hi, how are you?
I'm good, and yourself?
Doing well. And then a little later joining us will be Dr. Alana Curry. She describes herself as America's only trauma psychiatrist. So she'll pop in a little bit later, but we're going to start the conversation because this is such an important topic. So I'm going to start with you, Kim. Why is it so important to specifically focus on mental health in the Black community?
I think the mental health of the Black community, I think we are suffering silently. I think there's a lot of what we are dealing with internally. And I think there's a lot of stigma around mental health, around what it means to the African American community. And I think there's a lot of myths around things like you have to be strong, you shouldn't show weakness. I just feel like there's a lot of things that need to be talked out. And I think we need to be able to have an open dialogue such as this to be able to talk about those things, because those myths and beliefs that we have that are not necessarily true cause mental health, within the Black community.
Thank you. And other panelists, feel free to jump in if there's something that resonates with you. I don't want to just keep it one person, but if there's something you want to add, feel free to. Waridi, what are some unique mental health challenges faced by Black individuals today?
Well, I am working for the Cedars-Sinai Advancement Department, and we basically are helping out to support our LAUSD schools. So I am at some of the schools that are on our eastern border in Watts, California. 90% of the students that I work with are living in poverty. So that's just one of the trauma or one of the stresses that they have there. And then, we talk about some of the other stressors that come from living in communities that don't have a lot of resources. Most of my kiddos, when I ask them, hey, do you feel safe at home? No, miss, I live in the projects. All they do is shoot all the time. And it really breaks my heart to hear these things that are babies. I work at an elementary school that are going through. And so we're talking about just on the level of a child, you're having you're threatened every single day, and we know what that kind of trauma response can do to your body over time. And then on top of that, you're going to a school or you're living in a community where you don't even feel safe. You don't have the basic needs, and that's just the children. The parents that are living and taking care of these children, they also don't have the equality that we see in some of our other races in California or in the United States, period. They don't have access to housing. They don't have access to proper basic necessities and an opportunity to get equal education. So I think some of those are the unique mental health challenges that we face with just some of the Black individuals that we work with in the community.
Okay. What about you, Dr. Sabrina? Since, we're talking about some youth, do you have anything to add? I can repeat the question. It's what are some unique mental health challenges faced by Black individuals? And I'm just curious from your perspective and your clients.
Yeah, that's a really good question. would say one of the things that resonates with me is the lack of Black psychiatrists. So really, there's about 2 to 4% of all psychiatrists that are Black. 90% are non-Hispanic whites. Then you add in children that might need more to identify with their provider because they scared, they've never been through this before, and they're already facing a mental health problem. The shortage of child psychiatrists is vast. So factored into that, it's very, very rare to find Black child psychiatrists. And I think that's a huge disparity in the community.
It's interesting. Kim, what about you from your perspective? What are some unique mental health challenges faced by Black individuals today?
I mean, and I have, I work at Cedars-Sinai in the Work-Life Matters area. I also do some work on the side as private practice, and I have a lot of African-American clients who come in with a lot of trauma, a lot of not understanding why they have to be strong, why they can't be weak, why they always have to show up and have it all together. And I can relate to that because, I just feel like it's hard to show your vulnerability. It's hard to show what's really going on with you. And it's hard to just open up and talk about something simple that might be bothering you because you could get judged or criticized or devalued. So I just think there's a lot of trauma. I mean, particularly with our community that we're not comfortable with, we haven't touched, it's unresolved, we don't want to talk about it. And I think it's kind of this underlying thing going on that shows up as we interact with people, as we figure out who we are. And I think it's something that's pretty huge. I would love to hear from the other panelists that's going to come on and talk about trauma, but I think it's a huge thing within the Black community.
And this question just popped up into my head, but when talking about mental health and talking about children, how do you think that childhood trauma kind of plays out as one is growing up and into adulthood? And how is there a way to heal that? And this is for any of you that want to answer that question.
I can just step in. So childhood trauma can look like many different things. Mm-hmm. It can be a mimicker, and trauma can come out as behavioral issues, which in Black children will more likely be labeled as a conduct disorder versus their white counterparts that have a label of ADHD. And this shuffles them more into a setting where they're getting punitive treatment, so the principal's office in schools, but outside the community, the juvenile justice system. So I think that trauma, it's very important to recognize instead of labeling, especially when Black youth are more likely to come from low socioeconomic status and neighborhoods that have violence and are more prone to getting experience or traumatized by this.
Okay, thank you. Did either of you want to weigh in on that as well?
I wanted to just say that, when you talk about experiences, I think that all of us can agree as mental health experts that the reason that we do the job that we do every day is because we believe that you can change. And I think that's something that we need to kind of put out there and get people to understand, is that no matter what you've been through as a child, and even if you've, never talked to anybody about it, it's still an opportunity for you to change. And I think that these women would agree with me that we do a really good job in helping people get to that place in their life where they can make that change. So I think that's something, a really great question, because it's something that we need to get out in the community, that no matter what you've been through, there's always an opportunity for change.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that. Coming back to you, Kim, what are some of the key barriers to accessing mental health services within the Black community? I know we've talked a little bit about, maybe sometimes it's where someone lives, or, maybe they don't have the money for therapy. What are some other key barriers?
I think the main one that I come across is just insurance. It's like, do you have insurance? Do you, are you working to access insurance? If you don't have insurance and you have, you know, Medi-Cal, I mean, there's a lot of, organizations and communities and situations where they don't take certain insurances. And so that puts a barrier, I believe, with getting, the proper mental health services. So I just see a lot of that in at work and in the practices that I do outside of my job. And it's really, I really try to offer a lot of opportunities for particularly our community to be able to access, because it's enough for them to get to call or to reach out, just the ability to do that. And then there's barriers on top of that come, and then we're like, you know what, forget it, this is too hard. So I just really feel like we need to be, I'm hoping that we can start working on having a better access to resources and to have better insurances so that they can be able to help people who are actually taking that leap to be able to get mental health services. So that's huge for me.
What about you, Waridi? Are there any key barriers that you want to add to that?
No, I think Kim really summed it up. I think, you said it in a nice way, saying insurance, because I wrote down financial, because I think that when they go, it's the same, pretty much the same thing.
True.
It's like, it's almost, we might as well say it's 2025 and we still have people that don't have equal access to what they need. And I think what is the really saddest part is that it's the people that need it the most. Like, we're talking about these children that are living in trauma, living in poverty, that are going through all this difficultness as a young person, and they may want to change when they get older, but they don't have the financial means to do it. And so that's where we really need to make a change in our society and kind of talk about a little bit more equity as far as our health care system goes.
Okay. Dr. Sabrina, did you have anything to add about any other key barriers that you've come across?
I mean, I think a barrier is that mental health isn't considered health in our culture. And this is reflective in insurance companies not even covering mental health care a majority of the time. And so that's a barrier for everybody, but specifically these marginalized groups, minorities that don't have extra means to pay cash for these services, it becomes an exceptional problem.
Absolutely. So I wanted to actually come back to you, Dr. Sabrina, and you mentioned this earlier about, how some kids may be looked at as, you put a label on their behavior and others you don't, you kind of just excuse it. But are there any disparities in mental health diagnosis and treatment for Black individuals compared to other communities?
Yes. So, as I said, ADHD in particular in children, 9% of children will have this, but 70% of Black children will have an inappropriate mislabeling of an ADHD diagnosis as a conduct problem. And when they do get the proper diagnosis, the lack of resources offered to them is still the issue. Also, one of the saddest disparities is it's something that in the last 2 decades, Black youth between the ages of 10 and 19 have had an exponential amount of suicides. So in the last 2 decades, Black youth have an increase in suicide rates 60%, which is, and I think what underlies this is that lack of mental health care, the stigmatization, mislabeling. And then as they get older, Black males are more likely to be labeled with a severe mental illness like bipolar and schizophrenia, 6 times more likely than their white counterparts. And it's inappropriate diagnoses. So there are disparities with labeling and inappropriate diagnoses in the community.
Okay. How about you, Waridi and Kim? Do either of you have you noticed any disparities in mental health diagnosis and treatment for Black people versus other communities?
Well, so I am trained in child and parent psychotherapy, and I love the I love it. I felt like I learned so much just getting trained in that. And so when Dr. Sabrina is talking about the ADHD, it just kind of brings me to that conversation again about the misdiagnosis of our Black children who actually have trauma. And so sometimes they are misdiagnosed with ADHD and they're medicated. And so it's also those kinds of things where I think that it's kind of like sometimes it's like, oh, well, that's normal. That's, that's their everyday life. And so we don't even acknowledge the trauma that is experienced by this child who's been raised without their father, who's, had to live with their grandmother and all of these things. And why are they not able to sit down? Well, it might be because they had a lot of trauma when they were a child and their brain didn't develop correctly. And they don't have the ability to have those impulses or those impulsive controls. And so now we're diagnosing or over-diagnosing, oh, this child has ADHD, and really, the kiddo needs a little bit of one-on-one time with an adult or some other things like that. So I think that sometimes the difficulties that we go through as a culture are not even acknowledged. And so that also plays a part in how we are misdiagnosed sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Kim, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would add to, I totally agree with what Wardy was saying in terms of the trauma. I also have seen, I think the other part that concerns me is, are we doing the correct assessments and the correct ways in which we are diagnosing folks, kids in our community with ADHD or whatever they have? And I think that's a part of it too, because there's a laundry list of things that need to happen in order to appropriately diagnose somebody with ADHD. And it's not just, let me, fill out a sheet and then if you meet this criteria, then you have it. I think that there's another aspect to it too that impacts the misdiagnosis as well. And I think a lot of times, just from my experience, ADHD can look like anxiety. It can look like depression, but for some reason we're always putting it towards ADHD. So I do see that commonality in just some of the times that I've worked with psychiatrists and just some of the, individuals that I've worked with in our community.
Okay, thank you. And I want to remind everyone in the chat, if you have any questions, please drop it in there and we'll get to those. I'm coming back to you, Kim. How can we begin to break the stigma around mental health in the Black community? Because I don't know how many times I've heard growing up and even now, it's like, I'm not talking to anybody. I'm going to talk to the Lord and that's it. Or I'm going to just deal with it and be strong. I'm not going to talk to anybody, because you don't do that. So how do we break that stigma?
That's a loaded question. I've been in my own way, I have really been trying to open up the dialogue and just have general conversation about how we feel. And it's that, and by itself is difficult. And I think it starts at home. It starts at home with your parents. And we all know, just like you said, the parents are like, well, just pray it away. Well, just go to church. You'll be okay. And there's a difference between spirituality and mental health. They're both important, but I think spirituality is alongside mental health. You need a professional to be able to work with mental health issues, but spirituality, it can help with that. But I just believe that we have to be able to have the hard and courageous conversations, in our communities, at our schools, wherever you can talk about it. I think you have to be able to open it up and have the conversation, and it has to be in a safe place, so you can start with people, you can start with your friends and family, you can start with your coworkers. And I think it's got to start there. And I believe, because we have Work Life Matters and I'm in that department and we're working on well-being and we're talking about people at work, and we're just trying to get people to let them know that it's okay not to be okay, and that you can call us and talk to us, and that you don't have to let everybody know that you're calling us, that you can just call a number and check in and see if you're okay. So the more that there's, I think, opportunity for well-being and mental health to happen, and we as professionals show up and listen
Mm-hmm.
and provide the safe space to be for people to talk, I think it'll start to shift. It's going to be, I just feel like it's a hard shift to make. I don't know how you all feel, but I just think it's really difficult to make that shift in our community.
Mm-hmm. You brought up something I wanted to touch on for a second, but I think about the feeling safe, but I think the other part is being able to trust someone. So with now, especially with social media, you think you're confiding in someone, and the next thing you know, they posted your whole conversation online. Sometimes, and I don't know if you guys have seen that, but we'll get to the social media part. But I think trust is a big thing. Sometimes there are people that just don't trust talking to people. Or Edie, I wanted to get your opinion on how we can break the stigma around mental health.
I guess I'm just I know I remember there was a story on Instagram, so I was kind of just like, I didn't think about that. I think that's a really awesome question, Shamika, because I think that can be a problem. It's like you see this on TikTok and then you think, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to this lady and she's gonna, that blindsided me, because for me, it's really important that I keep my clients' information confidential, and that's like the basis and the foundation of who I am. I just have a lot of make sure that I stand behind the things that I do, and so I don't know. That's a tough one, because how do you get someone to understand? And I think kind of just what Kim is saying is just like little tiny droplets that we do as therapists. It's like I'm planting little tiny seeds, and hey, if I talk to you today and then I kept your secret, like I have to kind of keep in mind that I'm a therapist all the time, and any situation that I'm in, I have to kind of behave as if I'm a therapist, and understand that people are looking at me to see how therapists behave and how they interact with people. So I think that's something that just to keep in mind, that in every workplace or every situation that you're in, kind of what Kim was saying, is kind of get out there and talk to people and get them to know you so they can break down that stigma slowly. But like she said, that's a good question.
What about you, Dr. Sabrina? Do you have any thoughts on how we can break that stigma around mental health in the Black community?
I think it's really important to have mentors talking about mental health. So if that's the pastor in the community, if it's a football coach on a team or a teacher, having those open discussions about mental health and challenges that they might face, I think is going to make people feel more like it's a normalized thing and less like it's a taboo thing that shouldn't be talked about.
That's a good point. Waridi, how important do you think community and family support is in addressing mental health issues in Black families?
Okay, so I love that question. So as a therapist, we work with a client individually, but the client is part of the system. Whether they are having difficulties with their friends and family, whether they are having difficulties at work, they're part of a system. And so it's, again, I think the same kind of actions. It's just making sure that we are helping our clients to bridge that gap with their family members, and giving some interventions or giving some homework that might include the family, because now, oh, your therapist told you that? Okay, well, this person might not be so bad. But it's understanding that this person is not acting alone. And so you kind of have to work it in and help them to extend that olive branch to those that are in their family and talk about what's happening. So maybe, that's you did talk about that today. I mean, don't tell them all your business, but you know what I'm saying. Look, your cousin is like, oh wow, well, I found this person on here, and you can do this too. It's really like they say, each one teach one. We are kind of examples within our own community, and we're helping our family members to reach out and fix that entire system that our clients are in.
Thank you for that. Kim, how important do you think community and family support is in addressing mental health issues in Black families?
It's everything. It's really, really important. And I agree with what Wordy said in that, the client that we deal with as clinicians, they are part of the system, and a lot of times, a lot of the stress and the anxiety and all the things they're going through are coming from family dynamics. And so there's also this part where I see a lot where one person in the family wants to change and the rest want to stay the same. And so how do you navigate that? And a lot of it is just about you working on your growth and what's going on with you. And you may just have to be the example to the rest of the family about what it is to show up differently and do things differently. And maybe that'll create the change. But I see that, to me, as one of the biggest struggles in trying to get the family to kind of come together and talk about things. They're just very set in their ways, or certain ways they operate and they believe. And then it makes it hard for the person who really wants to do some work. So I think, our job is to be able to talk to them and meet with them, work with them, give them tools, give them, interventions, give them ways to communicate when you're dealing with family members who can be tough, or even in the community. I mean, when you talked about, someone said something about coaches, right? And there's coaches out there that have personalities and ways of being. And it's like, how do you operate and communicate with someone who can be who's treating you in an inappropriate way? Because that is growth. If we look at it, we're not going to grow if we're not in an uncomfortable environment. So we have to use that as our catalyst to grow. But it's hard to get people to see that, But I think just including family, and even including them in some sessions, or just having conversations with some of the family too, to hear them out, see what they're talking about, and see if there's just a little bit of a shift in perspective. It could be a big difference.
Thank you for that. Oh, we have a question. Let's see. Jade Romaine is asking, in what ways might depression present differently within the Black community, and how can mental health professionals ensure they are providing culturally responsive care? Kim, I'm going to start with you on that one.
I mean, I think in our community, depression, I see a lot of what they call high functioning depression. So people who, are doing their jobs and showing up and functioning and doing everything else, but then internally they're feeling depressed, right? So it's not going to show the same as it would if someone was maybe overtly, or you could see it on their face, like they're looking sad. So I think we need to me, and in the community that I've been working with in terms of some of the African-American women and men, I see a lot of high functioning depression. And I feel like that's getting overlooked. So those are the people who, kind of go out and they're doing it all. And then they turn around, and we see it on the news all the time. They turn around and then they end up killing themselves for some reason, right? So we have to look at, just because someone looks good on the outside doesn't necessarily mean there's nothing going on inside. And so there's a lot of signs of, just overperforming and doing really well, but then kind of isolating and not hanging out with people and not engaging in activities that they would typically engage in, but are just functioning. We don't want to look like, we don't have it all together. So that's what I see in terms of depression and how it shows up, and how we need to really look at that, because that's not a typical presentation of depression.
Okay. Hi, Dr. Curry.
Hi.
Well, you got here just in time. I'm going to give you this question. So the question is from one of our viewers, Jade Romaine. She wants to know, in what ways might depression present differently within the Black community, and how can mental health professionals ensure they are providing culturally responsive care?
Well, I think that depression presents differently in the Black community because it's often masked by anger and irritability. And so what I often tell people is that anger is an umbrella emotion, And anger, if you think of anger and all the different forms of anger, like if I asked us to just name a bunch of anger words, we'd be like irritable, rage, wrath. Like we could all go through and name a ton of words. Ticked off, pissed off, right? We have all those descriptions for that. Snarky, sarcastic. But what those really are is I'm hurting, I'm sad, I'm discontent with my life, I don't like how things are going. And what we often are faced with, just statistically, we know that most practitioners don't look like us, may not come from our background. And so when we're trying to explain what's happening to us, often we're explaining it through the lens of being upset about it. And so it's read as paranoia. It can be read, we're overdiagnosed with things like schizophrenia, because as if a practitioner is hearing you complain about my boss seems to be doing this and my coworkers seem to be doing that, and they're looking at it like this person is paranoid, that can really be the result of trauma. And that this person, I've had these micro traumas to where I don't trust these people, so I over interpret what might be happening. And the practitioner might experience that, especially if they don't have those experiences as much. They would interpret that as being more paranoid or more on the side of psychosis. So trauma is really a hidden element that we need to bring to the forefront of all mental health treatment, because traumatic experiences are not a subsect of mental health. We have a tendency to think of it like some people have depression, some people have anxiety, some people have substance problems. All people have traumatic experiences that have psychologically slapped them. And then the expression of it is what we call depression. The expression of that is what we call anxiety or anger management problems or ADHD or other stressors. So the more that we begin to centralize the concept that all of us experience trauma, and I'm not just talking about Black folks, because you ask any human being on earth 2024, they are having a traumatic things that are experienced internally painful that change the way they think about themselves, other people, and the rest of the world. That's my definition of psychological trauma. So that's really what I would say, is that in our formulation of mental health, it often, our current language and our current assessment systems have a tendency to underdiagnose or misdiagnose things because there's no empathy for our actual lived experiences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Which brings me to my next question, actually, for you, Dr. Curry. How does historical trauma, such as systemic racism, impact the mental well-being of the Black community?
That's such a loaded question. So I'll
I'm
just
full of those
say,
tonight.
y'all need to come to the Trauma Cure. I have a whole event around this coming up October 25th through 27th, where we're able to actually go in depth with all of this. But let me just say, immensely is the answer. How much does it impact us? More than we have even considered, because not only are we think about us as a physical being and a psychological being, right? We have this physical body, and then we have thoughts and feelings and imagination and all of the things that this brain can do that you can't put your finger on it, but we know it's real. And those historical traumas, and not just, when we think of chattel slavery, but we're not just talking about people being owned, but people being abused, violated, their bodies, their will being violated, the concepts of what's taught to them about how they even identify ourselves. The fact that we think there's more than one race is still a product of slavery trauma that we have not gotten out of. All human beings have melanocytes. All human beings have melanin. Okay. Some of our melanin is darker than others, and that's why we have skin tone differences. But you can't be a functional human being without those melanocytes. So we have so much misconception about black and white and, you know, all these different things. We are all human. All of us have a brain that's calculating information, that's kicking out invisible surges and urges that move us in our decision making, and we get zero formal education about it. So not only do we have a genetic impact on our DNA, there's a whole field called epigenetics, where epigenetics is basically we all have very similar DNA, but your epigenetics are the proteins that decide which part of your genes are going to be expressed at which time, turning them on and off. And so we have inherited concepts from our ancestors. They weren't even alive to tell us, but they passed it through their DNA. So that not only do we have ancestral pain and ancestral learning, but then we also grow up in families that say, you know, if we go back 100 years ago, we weren't supposed to look white people in the eye, right? You're not supposed to do certain things. So those behaviors, like don't do that, that's dangerous. So somebody grows up under the concept that they're going to teach their children and teach their children, this is how you behave to stay safe in this world. And so we have a biological programming and a psychological programming that we have to still break free from. And we have yet to do that work because we keep we're embarrassed to have the conversation about what we have done to each other.
Thank you for that. And I want to also piggyback on that. I'm just throwing all the questions at you, Dr. Curry, since you just got here. But how does cultural stigma around mental health affect Black individuals seeking help?
Well, that is why we're so behind. It is why we're behind in engaging in this process. But the good news is that anytime you get us in somewhere, we can catch up and we go hard, and then we end up doing even better. So here's the good news. The stigma has been disabling us for a long time. I love God too, and I believe in prayer, and I believe in therapy, and I believe in medications when they're needed. Thank God for modern science, and thank God for the thousands and thousands of people who did the research so that we can know that certain chemicals are off in certain conditions and that we have something that can fix that, right? Or at least can help manage it. So stigma is keeping us from getting help, because if you think about it, Black folks in America, I mean, other than Native Americans, who we definitely know still getting the short end of the stick, African Americans have been extremely abused. We got all the history and the data. Every time we do studies, we show that there's these disproportionate impact on our health. So it's not a mystery anymore. It's just we refuse to draw the conclusion because we're still thinking that there's something called different races. There's no, there's different potential across every type of human being, white, Black, Asian, Native American, whatever. But the difference is, how does that person, do they get nurtured? Do they have the right opportunities? Do they get education? Is their environment polluted? Are they able to have jobs without being discriminated against, jobs that have dignity and pay them enough to be able to work one job and take care of their family? These are all things that are systematic problems. So it's not the problem with the communities. Ain't nothing wrong with us, okay? But what's wrong with us is that we refuse to acknowledge that traumatic things can make you smoke, drink, do other things that you probably don't need to be doing, right? that our taste buds that our ancestors have given us, because they gave them the worst of the food. We threw all the salt, sugar, and butter on it and made it taste amazing. But now it's giving us heart attacks and diabetes and bad habits. And it's an addiction that we haven't addressed. So that's where, once we break out of stigma and we're willing to talk about it, I say there's no shame in something that everybody's dealing with. Now we're talking about Diddy and all this other stuff going on. Do you know how many people, they say that we have 1 in 3 women have domestic violence and sexual abuse in their relationships, 1 in 4 men. And we know that people, when they're gathering these statistics, they don't get everybody and they don't tell it all. So we know that's an understatement of how many people are being abused within their own homes and their own families and their own friend circles. And so we are experiencing the impact of constantly having trauma, and everybody just says, be resilient, keep it moving, push forward. And it's all, you know, you ever throw a bunch of stuff in a closet, eventually that closet can't hold it anymore. And 2024, like Cat Williams said, is the year everything is being revealed. So let's get past the stigma, because once we can talk about it and we can address it, and we can be like, oh, I'm not alone. You had that too. I thought I was crazy. Oh, it's a lot of people out there who dealing with what I'm dealing with. Oh, there's an answer. There's a way to improve. Let's do that. So that's why stigma is so devastating to our community. Because if you can't talk about and name a problem, then you can't fix it. And we need to fix it.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Sabrina, how would you say racism and discrimination impacts the mental health of Black youth?
Significantly.
Mhm.
In the research, it shows that Black youth are growing up in areas of poverty and violence. And then on top of that, they're getting discriminated against. They're having micro and macro aggressions. And so over time, that leads to chronic stress, anxiety, and depression. It's like you put somebody in this pressure cooker, they're going to boil over. So Black youth, they really do face a lot more challenges than their white counterparts because of the discrimination aspect.
Okay. Waridi, what can parents and educators do to support the mental health of young Black individuals?
Show up and be an example.
Mhm.
If we have parents that have their children in therapy, you feel like your child needs therapy, maybe you can also join them in therapy. Just be an example. I think that a lot of our educators need to understand the weight that is on their shoulders and how some of these children have not been in school, and they're the first people they've ever had an experience with outside of their home. And so that's important to remember when you are going to work every day and understanding what it is that you're doing. Is just making sure that you are showing up in the community and being an example, kind of like the tone that we're saying here is that we have to all kind of work together to make sure that we understand how our community needs help.
Okay. Kim, what resources or programs are available to specifically support Black mental health?
Wow, there's a lot of resources that are available. And I think, while there is therapy, I want to capitalize on therapy is not the only way. There's a lot of different ways to be able to address mental health issues within our community. And it doesn't have to be sitting down with a therapist. There are a lot of groups out there that are being run that people just choose to run on their own that you can jump into. There's there's just a lot of online resources where, folks who don't want to have to sit in front of someone and have a conversation or look at someone, they can actually engage in self-help things online. We have in our program at Work Life Matters, which I think is really important, and I hope a lot of other organizations have, but there's a mobile app. So if you want to chat with a counselor, you can chat with them via on your phone. Like, you don't have to see them, they don't have to see you. And you can just have a conversation that way. I think there needs to be a variety of resources out there for us to engage and for us to be able to embrace mental health in the way that's comfortable for us. And it's not just throwing therapy down people's throats, because I do see that a lot. It's like, well, just go to therapy, just go see a psychiatrist, just go do this. But there's so many other things. There's life coach. I mean, there's so many other opportunities that maybe a lot of people don't know about that we need to be educating people about, so that it's not just a one-way stream of getting those resources.
Thank you. I wanted to go back to the social media comment I brought up earlier about how sometimes there's that mistrust because, these days people are quick to, they're looking for content. So they run to social media with, whether it's screenshots or just telling the story of what happened in a session or, whatever it is. So I'm going to throw this kind of out to all of you. So how do you think social media influences mental health perceptions, especially among Black youth and adults, both positively and negatively? Who wants to go first?
I'll start.
Okay.
I think that social media has a lot of pros and cons. And I think it's important for us to understand that the human brain has a system called the brain reward system. It's our addiction system. Everybody has it, me, you, all of us here. And it responds to things that feel good and likes, hearts, comments, engagement. It feels good. So guess what? Ding! You get a little dopamine when you get on and you see that somebody has liked your thing or followed your page or made a comment. And when you give your opinion on Twitter or wherever else, formerly known as Twitter, whatever, when you are putting your opinion out there, you're getting dopamine from other people reading it and acknowledging, even if they argue with you. So there is a chemical component that needs to be understood. We judge our kids because they're in these devices so hard. But if we took a step back and watched ourselves, I guarantee you don't get too far away from your phone at this point, because it's designed to be addictive and pull you in and pull you back to it. And so we, first of all, need to stop judging them for having trouble managing the drug that we've put in their hands. Our schools have put computers in their hands. And I don't know about y'all, but you can't put a crackhead, and crack in the same room and expect them not to partake. Okay. And so we need to keep it real about what's going on here. It's not just the kids, it's the adults, but the kids are more susceptible to it because they don't have the background that we have of being able to distinguish what's real and what's not. And so then we sit around and we wonder why we have fights in schools. We have stressed out, hyper kids that can't concentrate and don't read because the devices are stimulating their brains. And they're getting that from the time that they're babies. I mean, I gave my kids phones and things with the little device games long before I ever understood that these are addictions. I'm giving them a tool, no different than you might have grown up seeing your folks smoke or drink to cope with the stresses of their life. They taught us bad behaviors long before they showed us healthy behaviors like going to therapy, talking things out, apologizing, meditating. So it's not the kids, it's us. And I want to reinforce that over and over again because the adults have to be the ones to recognize and have some good logic that says, yes, I grew up on video games, but my video games couldn't do the things these video games do. And now that they can, they're more addictive. These companies are being sued right now. TikTok, Snapchat, Meta, Fortnite was sued for making their game intentionally addictive. It's the parents that have to wake up and understand that you can't just I wish I had a sponsorship from Bark Phones because I just got one recently so I could try to monitor my kids interactions better, because if we allow this, they'll grow up and be adults who don't know how to communicate with each other because they've been texting shorthand and tweeting each other and talking to each other crazy. And nobody's really paying attention to how this develops their social interactions. And then we look up and we go, oh, why are they having so many problems? It's the grown-ups. I'll stop there.
No, that's great. Because I was just thinking, that makes sense why some grown-ups can't talk and communicate now because they're used to just talking online.
And just let me touch on that because we're deteriorating in our communication because anytime think about this. When you're sitting in a room with another person, you can see them, you can hear them, you can even feel their presence and their tone. And then if you are just on a video call, right, I can see you, but I can't feel you. Or if I'm on a phone call, then I can hear you, but I can't see you and I can't feel you. And then if I'm sending you an email, you might get a lot of words from me, but you have to interpret those words out of context. And then if it's a tweet or a text, it's even easier to misinterpret and miscommunicate. So we often think that we are getting information over to the other people accurately, and they are reading and misinterpreting what we're saying through their own traumatized lens, through their own whatever is going on in that moment. So human communication is broken right now because we are lacking appreciation for how much is lost in translation as we put barriers in our communication. That's affecting our mental health as well.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Did anyone else want to weigh in on that about social media and how it's impacting mental health?
I want to say that for me, I'm not doing what I need to do, but I think it's a platform of helping to normalize things a bit. Like Doctor said, there's the pros and then there's the cons. So for me, as a therapist, I've been able to kind of be in those spaces or follow some of those pages of some people that are out there talking about mental health. And I'm so like, yeah, this is great. Like, so I think that while it's very important, I talked about that so much about parents and the system is that, you have to make sure that you monitor your children whilst we have those things in place. I think you choose your algorithm, you choose the things that you're kind of feeding to your soul. So I think that's something that we can talk to about with our clients about as well. It's like, it can be a good tool. It can be something that can cause some problems, but you can also go there some days to get some strength, to go there to get some words of encouragement that can help you out.
Thank you. Kim or Dr. Sabrina, either one of you want to jump in?
No, the only thing I would say is piggyback off what Wardy said. I think there are a lot of outlets, social media wise, that are helpful for us to be able to get a better understanding of mental health. And I think it's an easier way sometimes for someone to lead in and hear information where they can relate. And then maybe that could start a conversation. So there's just so many podcasts and, different people trying to bring the message to a lot of people in the world to say, it's okay. We're all struggling. We all got mental health. We all got some type of mental health issues, just on different intensity levels. And we all got some type of trauma. It's just, let's talk about it. And I think it's a good platform. But I do agree that there are, the downsides of it too. But we have to look at what it's doing, to help us in the fight that we're trying to do as well.
Absolutely. Dr. Sabrina, how about you?
Everything in moderation. And I think, children and teens, like Dr. Curry was saying, they just don't really know how to filter. And sometimes if that algorithm is skewed towards things that are negative, they are more prone to developing depression, anxiety, and even substance use. So being that responsible parent and moderating, making sure that there's limited screen time and know what they're looking at is going to be really key in helping them navigate.
Okay. Well, I got one more question for you guys. It is, and this is for everyone, so we'll just kind of go around the room or around the square. And so I'm going to start with Dr. Alana. Am I pronouncing that right, Dr. Alana?
Yes, Dr.
Yes,
Alana.
Dr. Alana. I'm sorry. I was like,
Yeah,
I've been calling Dr. Curry all the whole time.
I used to be Dr. Curry when I was treating patients. I was definitely Dr. Curry, but I'm retired from clinical care. I teach, train, and explain the brain. So okay. I go by Dr. Alana so people can make the distinction.
Gotcha. Okay. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Alana. In this question, I'm going to ask everybody the same thing, but what's one thing that you believe Black individuals should remember when it comes to seeking mental health support?
The one thing they should remember, I would say the one thing you should remember is that you are a creator. And what I mean by that is that every human being grows up. When we say identity, we think of our name, we think of our gender, we think of our ethnicity, not race, right? We're going to fix that because there's no such thing as biracial. Okay. All right. Genetically, we're 99.9% the same. So there is lots of different ethnicities, meaning the environment has put pressures on our body that might change the external expression of our physical characteristics, but our internal characteristics are the same. So there's lots of ethnicities and there's cultures even within those ethnicities, but your identity is that you are a creator. Your thoughts are creative. When you're thinking something, it's churning out things that happen in your body. Your words are creative. When you say things, even if nobody's else in the room, they come out and they go back in your ears and they generate chemical responses and other factors that you live out. There's literally no such thing as doing nothing. So if you're thinking, I didn't say anything, I'm not doing anything, what was happening when all that was going on? Nothing. Impossible. Even when you are asleep, your brain is churning, it's kicking out conclusions and information. You don't disappear when you stop doing things. So my point is that in being a creator, it means that you have to be responsible for what you create. And so many of us are walking around thinking that other people make us feel a certain way. No, it's you and your brain that are creating those experiences. And then you carry that out. So no one is making you do anything. You are responsible for what you create in this world. And in the default is that you're creating without fully understanding the amazing technology that is you, and that your mental health and the mental health of everyone in your household, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your family, your friends, it depends on you doing your work to control what you create. And that I'll leave it at that.
I like that. Waridi, what about you? What's one thing you believe Black individuals should remember when it comes to seeking mental health support?
So I think that it's really important to find a professional who supports your growth, but making sure that they're not attempting to control you. I think a good therapist is someone who looks to empower you, trust your instincts, and guide you in developing your self-awareness. So your insights and feelings are valuable, and therapy should be a collaborative process that helps you to reach your full potential. And I think that sometimes because we're going to this doctor or we're going to this professional, we kind of get a little lost in translation, and we may not be comfortable with the things that someone is telling us. I think that people should trust their instinct. And if you don't feel comfortable, there's tons of providers out here. So make sure that you find someone that you really feel comfortable with, because the most important part of the therapeutic process is the therapeutic alliance.
Oh, thank you. Kim, your turn. What's one thing you believe Black individuals should remember when it comes to seeking mental health support?
I would say just basic level, you're not alone. We all have something we're dealing with. And I think it's really important because I think a lot of people feel like they're not, they're the only people who have issues or problems, but I think not to be alone. I would also piggyback on what Weirdy said, in that when you're looking for someone to talk to in terms of a professional, you want to find someone who you connect with and who has a good energy, and you can see yourself opening up and talking about things on a deep level, and you feel safe with that person. And it's the responsibility, this is huge for me, but it's the responsibility of the therapist, particularly African American therapists, men and women, to be able to have a conversation and talk about what it is that you came here for, what it is that you're looking for. And let me tell you my style. Let me tell you how I operate. Let me tell you how I would conduct sessions with you, and make sure that it is a match. I don't see that happening a lot with a lot of therapists. It's just like, let's do an intake, let's get the information, and then we start talking. You need to make sure that you are a good fit for the person that's sitting in front of you. And it's our job to be able to do that as professionals. It's also the people who are coming for therapy. It's also your job to shop around. Just like you go shopping at the grocery store to pick out what you want, and you go to different places, you do the same thing for a therapist, and you find the one that works for you. And there is somebody out there for all of us, right? If you have a bad experience with one of them, that doesn't mean that all of them are the same. We're all different. We all come with different ways of doing therapy, and there's somebody out there for you. So advocate for yourself. Tell the therapist what you're looking for, right? I love when people come to me and like, Kim, I need you to talk direct to me. I don't need this sugarcoating and this nice talk. I need you to be direct. Okay, so then I'm not the therapist for you. And the therapist has to be open enough to say, I'm not your therapist, but I will help you find somebody else. It's just so important that we show up the way we need to show up, so that when people do come, because it takes them a lot to come, that you're giving them the best service that they can get. It's so important to be able to do that, because once one person comes and they have a bad experience, the majority of the time they won't go back. You could be that person that they don't go back for because of whatever you did or did not do, right? So just both ends have to be lined up and really looking at how can we really help this person in terms of their well-being.
Thank you. That's a great, absolute great point, because I was one that didn't know you could shop around. I thought, I found one, I have to stick with her. And turns out it wasn't the right fit. So absolutely advocate for yourself and shop around. Dr. Sabrina, what's one thing you believe Black individuals should remember when it comes to seeking mental health support?
Again, mental health is health, and our brain and our body is connected. Treating it like it's something that is strange or needs to be hidden, like if you have a chemical imbalance, you're depressed, anxious, or you're having, experiences where you see things or hear things. It's like hiding the fact, if you have type 2 diabetes, that you have an insulin resistance, and denying that it's actually happening to you. It's all part of our body, and acknowledging that and accepting that, I think, is a step in the right direction, so you can get the treatment that you deserve. Because just like type 2 diabetes, you want to make sure you have access to your insulin so you don't get sick.
I love that mental health is health. We need some t-shirts with that. That is absolutely correct. And I think that sums it up for World Mental Health Day. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us and really digging deep into this topic and shining a light on mental health awareness. So I want to thank you again, and everyone else. For more resources on mental health, you can head over to blackdoctor.org. There's tons of articles and a lot of information over there. And I want you to also make sure that you share this with your network, because again, mental health is health. And I want everyone to have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.